The extent is the encompassing ontology contrast against the subject of observation. Ontology is the regress of a state of being present. When an ontology encompasses an ontology, we say that the extent encompasses a regress. The extent is an ontology when it is not the subject. When an ontology encompasses a subject, we describe an extent. The extent is boundary beyond the subject being defined. In fiction, predominantly science fiction and fantasy, there is a common trope known as alternate or parallel realities or universes. These are unique, separate, but connected realities of other planes and or realms of existence. Divergence of probability in our quantum state. The extent is the regress that encompasses, separates, and connects alternate or parallel realities. In geometry, 2 points on the same line are collinear. 2 lines on the same plane are coplanar. The analogy tends to stop there, but we can continue this analogy further. 2 planes within the same solid are cosolid. An ontology is defined as a regress. Like a being that is introverted and extroverted, the regress of the ontology is a threshold which can be defined as interior, medial, or external. Everything outside the regress of the ontology is external. The boundary of the ontology is the extremity and is medial. Everything from the center of an ontology toward the extremity of the ontology is its interior. Everything beyond the medial is exterior, but is encompassed within the external. These properties and their interactions give rise to the nature and quality of the regress. When the interior of an ontology encompasses an ontology, the regress becomes more complex, giving rise to the extent. When ontology B is encompassed by ontology A, the presence of ontology B within ontology A causes ontology B to be known as extent A. Extent A encompasses ontology B. Ontology B is encompassed within the interior of extent A. The external regress of ontology B is encompassed within the medial boundary of extent A. In the context of the form of science, we have established that a circle is a line drawn parallel to a point. When we describe an infinitely small point with an infinitely long line drawn parallel to it, we describe an infinite circle. In the context of this formal writing, if we draw a line from the infinitely small point encompassed within the location at the center of the circle to the infinitely long circumference, which is the extremity of the infinite circle, we define a radius which is 1/2 infinity in length. From this radius emerges a diameter of 1 infinity, which can be used to further describe the circle. Taken as a whole, this infinite circle can be defined as an extent, with the edge of the circumference of the circle marking its edge and boundary. When a figure is drawn within an infinite circle, the figure is said to be inside the extent. Utilizing this infinite circle as a framework to define and describe the ontological extent, we can state plainly that within the boundary of the circle there are several points. In geometry, these points are coplanar. In my 2 cents, we state that these points are correlative to each other due to a circle inheriting the attributes of a figure plane. In my 2 cents, the coplanar points within the infinite circle are defined as a regress. They inherit qualities of their being from the circle, and the circle inherits qualities of its being from the points. This is how and why an extent is also an ontological regress. While the analogy works as a simple description for sum of nature and quality of both the extent and the regress, it is, in its current definition, it is predominantly just the emergent quality of the extent is based exclusively on the principle of observation. When we observe a thing, there is always a subject directly being observed and a subject indirectly being observed, the background. If we consider our infinite circle, we started with a point in some regress. Then we define the point as a line drawn parallel to a point while still inherently in infinity. Our perception as sentient, cognitive, present state beings is always a finite abstraction of infinite values. In other words, our formal abstraction of a circle subjectively to be an infinity is not empirical, but infinity is empirical. Infinity as a nature and quality does in fact exist in its own proper context. What then needs to be understood is if we draw or define any figure or subject that must be perceived by our perception, to know or understand the subject in question, we must dichotomize its nature and contrast it against the infinity wherein which it is encompassed. Therefore, if we consider our infinite circle and objectively draw it as a figure with a radius of 1/2 inch in a diameter of 1 inch, we can formally abstract that this subject is a representation of infinity. And doing this on a piece of paper that is 8.5 by 11 inches, and there is a lot of blank or emptiness that still exists on the paper. This is the contrast against our 1 inch figure that we are formally implying is infinity. When we formally perceive it this way, the subject is the circle and the contrast is the blank paper or canvas that the figure has been illustrated on. The circumference of the circle is an extremity. Everything beyond the extremity of the circle is the extent, and the circle becomes the regress. Everything beyond the finite sheet of paper is the extent, and the paper now becomes a regress. But in context, this can only be true if the paper becomes the subject.